Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. What is OCM, you might ask? Organizational Change Management. I can guarantee that if you've been working in the technology industry for any length of time, you may have firsthand experience with an OCM program, or the lack of one. In this episode, Jonathan and Jen break down the basics around OCM and share examples of when it works and when it does not. Many organizations often miss the opportunity that lies within a well-thought-out OCM strategy. More thought goes into scoping out the technology and not on the impact to the organization. Let's listen in and get an introduction to OCM.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. This is our podcast about all things digital in engineering, manufacturing, product development, that space. Talking about, digital threads, digital twins, and all the digital things. And my name's Jonathan Scott. Here again with my co-host, Jen Farello. Jen?
Hi there.
And, we're changing things up a little bit this episode, as you could probably tell, because you're used to Jen's voice kicking us off and introducing things. And here I am changing up the rhythm. But despite that, Jen, what are we here to talk about today? What's our topic?
Well, so on one of our previous podcasts, we talked about some of the reasons change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And, it came down to, people is one of the biggest reasons that change is hard. And towards the very end of that, we started talking about the fact that there's actually a practice or a business methodology now wrapped around the fact that people are hard.
Yep.
And it's called organizational change management. So that's what we're going to talk about today is OCM.
I love it. Right. It has a name. We might as well name it and talk about it. And
right.
to that point, it's something that we've been, I won't say Razorleaf has been, doing for decades, because I don't know that we have. We've been doing pieces of it for decades, but it's nice to give it sort of the formal name and understand the practice of it, what it is. And I think it'll be good to dive into some of the things that organizations should be thinking about for OCM to help people change, to help people get used to new processes, tools, that sort of thing. So I'm excited to dig into it a little bit today. And we don't have
people are my favorites, so
right?
I am too.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. We have been doing it, just not officially as a discipline.
Right.
It's been more along the lines of doing pieces of OCM helps us be more successful, helps our customers be more successful. Because,
right.
OCM is really nothing other than preparing, supporting, and helping individuals, teams, organizations, et cetera, move from current state to future state. And that's what we're doing. That's, when you're introducing a new system, when you're bringing something on, you're doing an update, et cetera, processes, technology changes, and it's the helping people through that change.
Yeah, you're right. That's our work, right? That's what we do. And I guess in the interest of full disclosure, yeah, you're right. I don't think Razorleaf, we certainly didn't do it as a formal discipline back when we first got started. And to your point, a lot of things that you do as a consultant, you evolve over time as you learn what works and what's successful and that sort of thing. And then at some point we made the shift from, well, yeah, we were doing a lot of these things because we needed to wait, I bet somebody's done this before. And, sort of understanding the formal discipline of OCM and starting to implement it as part of our projects. But regardless of how we got there, we're here. We want to talk about it. We want to sort of share the gospel, right? Make sure people know what OCM is and dig into it a little bit. So I'm thinking the right place to start is, okay, what is it? I think you said the acronym, right? Organizational Change Management. But from your take, what is OCM? What are we talking about? What are we digging into?
Well, like I just said, it's helping, it's introducing change and helping individuals move through that process. So it's understanding where they are, what they're doing right now, and communicating the value of the change and what it's going to take and why it's important to them, to the organization, et cetera. And one of the reasons that OCM is such an important discipline as part of any sort of change is it's important to recognize that change is hard. And by default, we are kind of hardwired to resist change. It's actually, we really are hardwired. It's a defense mechanism more than anything. But as you're changing your technologies, processes, et cetera, helping to minimize that resistance, will help them adopt new technologies, new processes faster while still maintaining productivity across the way. And then, obviously all of that leads to creating more of a positive culture. So nobody's feeling like things are forced down their throat versus, no, you actually get to play a role in it.
I'm with you on all of that. That all makes sense. I want to offer an additional angle to it that you touched on, but I want to give it kind of this lens that I think it's about speed also, right? Because when you introduce something new, there are lots of ways you can get to the finish line of introducing that new thing and getting people to do it the new way. And there are lots of those ways that are inefficient and painful and take a long time. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of project work gets done. And the really bad news is that's why some IT projects fail, is it takes a long time, but they never get to that finish line, right? So OCM is, to me, the reason you're managing the organizational change is it's about how do you do it efficiently, quickly. How do you get to the finish line? Because you can get there a lot of ways, but you want to get there in a way that leaves people with a positive taste in their mouth, like you said, the positive culture that does it quickly so you don't waste a lot of time and energy and money doing it and having to, somebody does resist and you have to get over that or talk them through it. And now that slows everybody down. It's avoiding all that inefficiency. It's people. You can't fully optimize it. But I think that's what OCM is about, is how to move through it in a good, optimal way for that organization, right? And that's the O piece of the OCM is it's not like you're, convincing yourself to stick to a diet or an exercise habit. It is a people thing, but it's about a group of people, which has got its own challenges.
Yeah. And matter of fact, when you mention the diet or exercise plan, like it's also not just getting to that point, like, hey, we're done. We implemented it. It's making sure that it continues, that people are using it. So enhancing that, that adoption, making sure they're using it, that it's useful, that they continue to use it.
Right.
And OCM really isn't one of those things that just starts and stops. It just kind of keeps going.
Agreed. So that's what it is. It's a little bit of why it's important, like why we need to do it as part of technology projects, right? Mm-hmm. Implementing a system, implementing a new process, updating a system, even, system upgrades, things like that. It sort of fits into all those kinds of projects, I think. But I think we should spend some time talking about what we think the major components are of an OCM program, right? So when we bring OCM to clients, when we see clients do this themselves, what are some of the key pieces? So, let's just dig into that. I've got a few I can think of. I'm sure you've got some you can think of, but let's just start naming some and talking through them to help the audience who maybe isn't as familiar with this as a discipline understand the kinds of things we're talking about. So kick it off. Throw a couple in there.
Sure. Matter of fact, it's funny. One of the first things that I did when I joined Razorleaf was write 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 series of blog posts on OCM. And, they basically overcoming resistance and the formula around overcoming that resistance. And the first piece of that really is leadership and vision. It's having a strong leadership position, but also like painting a vision that people can get behind so that they know, like it's very important when you're engaged in any sort of project like this to understand not just your role, but the value of your role to the overall change.
Right. How you fit in the picture, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
What your contribution is, yeah.
And there's another piece that I'll come back to that lens I offered a minute ago about, it's about speed. It's about how quickly and efficiently you can get through this. I think that piece that you just mentioned about leadership and vision is critical to that. Because if you don't use that vision, if you don't paint that picture of where we're going and why we're going there, what the project is about, what the outcome is supposed to be, how it's going to help us, all of those kinds of things. If you're not crystal clear on that, it's very difficult to get everyone aligned and pulling in that same direction. And there's a huge time waster, right? So if you're thinking about that efficiency and speed thing, it's people pulling in different directions. Oh, I heard we're doing a PLM project. Well, I thought it was for this. I thought it was for that. Oh, I'm working on this. This matters to me. If you didn't have somebody bring it all together with that kind of vision of what you're trying to do, you can suffer from that. Seems like all good stuff, but it's going to slow you down.
Well, and not to mention, it's not only that, it's also the fact that at the top, you've got buy-in, right? Management team has decided this is an important initiative. Because if you don't have, so if hey, we're going to implement PLM, but if at the top, they don't feel that there's a value there, you're going to run into like blocks, obstacles all along the path versus, you need not just the vision, but you need a leadership say, no, like, okay, I get that you're not super enthusiastic. Just go ahead and dig in, do your part. We'll get there. I promise we'll get there. And it's just that constant reinforcing, because if management doesn't think it's important, guess what? Nobody else does.
Right. Yeah. No, and you bring up a really good point there too, is let's say you've got a vision, you've painted a vision for whatever program you're doing, whatever technology you're implementing, processes you're changing. And, not everything in a company starts with the CEO. So let's assume that vision is painted by somebody who's at a mid-level or a mid to high level, but not at the top of the organization. If you don't spend the time on aligning up also, there are some of your blocks right there, right? I thought we were going to do this project. I thought it was going to get us these benefits. It's a great idea. Everybody below me, we're all lined up. We're ready to go. But it turns out that my boss doesn't think that's one of my top priorities this year. Oh, boy.
Right.
Better to know that up front, work on it, get that alignment, fix that alignment, or delay it, right? But it's going to slow you down if you don't. Back to that point about, speed and efficiency.
Right. And I would say it's so, aside from the leadership and vision, which is a lot of that is managing up, if you will, or starting at the top and managing down. But it's also one of the most important pieces is to get all of the stakeholders involved.
Yep.
And by, all the stakeholders, and it doesn't have, all stakeholders are not the same as far as their value, their contribution, the need for their day-to-day involvement. But it's absolutely critical for anybody whose work is going to be changed by this.
Yes.
To be involved, to be informed, to wherever possible or appropriate, their feedback requested, their participation. Because again, that's a great way to avoid all of the backbiting and the passive resistance.
Yep.
Is to involve people.
Absolutely. You're starting to address the resistance early by just involving all the right people and not forgetting anyone. And that you use the word stakeholder. That we should take a minute on that.
Okay.
A lot of people hear that word and they're like, yeah, I know what you mean, right? Somebody who cares. Well, yes, but just to go a little bit deeper, anyone who holds a stake in the project, the process, the technology, in any of that stuff. And this is, I think you have to do some work up front in an OCM project around assessment, around figuring out who your stakeholders are, understanding what they need to hear. Because stakeholders are different, right? They're obviously, let's talk about a system. We're doing a PLM system deployment. There are obviously stakeholders like people who use the system, but there are less obvious stakeholders like the people who have to administer the system and own it in IT. Are they a stakeholder? Yes, they are. They're not just the people you ask to stand up the servers. They're a stakeholder. Well, what about customers? Maybe. Some cases they are. Some cases you let them into your system and they're users, so you have to pay attention from that perspective. In some cases, they're not direct users of maybe this PLM system, but they get the output. They get the outcome. They're going to care, A, that maybe you're changing the way you do business. B, maybe that your business is interrupted while you're doing the project. So there's lots of reasons people have a stake in what you're doing. And that's, when I say stakeholder, I just want people to think about it a little more deeply than, well, who are my users? Who's going to be impacted if the system's down? It's not just that.
Well, and to your point, as far as you mentioned suppliers, partners, what about just other departments? Right? Because and we've talked about this on other podcasts, a lot of times PLM, one of the challenges we run into with PLM implementations is it's seen as an engineering-only system.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas to really realize the value of PLM, you need to be cross-functional.
Yep.
You have to acknowledge that you're interacting with ERP, you're interacting with MES. Those are stakeholders too. Yes, they are not necessarily users of the PLM system, but same as suppliers, they are interacting with it.
That's right.
And the importance of involving the stakeholders is not just about preparing them for it or making them feel heard, although those are two really important things. It's also because they have a different perspective and they very well may bring up things that you didn't know or didn't think about ahead of time that you really need to incorporate it, or it would be best to incorporate early on in the program. And I'm even going to like give a shout out to all the naysayers. You know what? Naysayers are not all bad.
Right.
Number one, sometimes, again, like, different perspective, they have different views that like things you haven't, maybe you need to slow down on a few things because you're not as fully thought out as you thought. But the other thing is like, get them out early. If they're going to be naysayers, you want that out in the open so you know that these are areas where you need to pay attention.
Agreed. And I'll even say it differently. I have a little different take on that. I don't like naysayers. I don't like negative, right? What I like is a contrary position, right? Be willing to hear the alternatives, that kind of thing. I mean, and there's even a position for negative. I've had a few friends in my life who are like that, who are like, you know what? Sometimes there's something to be said for that. But I like the idea of it's diversity of opinion, even if it's not what you want to hear. Hear it early. Yes. Deal with it early. And to me, that also connects to another piece that you want to do in your OCM program related to assessment is planning, right? So assess where you're at. Understand, what state are you in? Where are you trying to get to? Who are your stakeholders? There's a lot of other things to assess. I won't make it a laundry list here, but then make a plan because you should do this early. And you need to think about how this organizational change, how are you going to make it happen in parallel with whatever the change is that you're trying to help adopt, right? So if it's an upgrade and it's only going to take 2 months, you don't have a lot of time to get this out in front of people and how you're going to help them accept the change and get ready for it and all those things. If it's a replacement of a PLM or deployment of a PLM system, maybe it's going to take a year. I don't know. You got more time. But you need a plan up front to figure out what you need to do at what stage to get it right. But don't wait until the end to make a plan. I think that's what I'm getting at. That's a piece of OCM that's important early.
No, I agree with that. And I would say hand in hand with creating that plan, or a key piece of that plan, is how you're going to communicate, how often you're going to communicate, and to whom. And the message is it's going to be different to each of the different groups. The message and the frequency are going to be different.
No, you hit the nail on the head, right? That's why I was understanding those stakeholders up front is so important, so that when it's time to think about how you're going to communicate to them, you can do what you just said, kind of segment that audience of, well, I need these messages to get to these people, and I need these messages to get to these people. For some people, it's, hey, don't worry, you're going to hear more about it later, but I just want you to know something's going on. Other people are, look, we're changing this thing, and now is when you get to have your input. I need to hear from you today. Different messages to different people. But if you don't understand those audiences, then you can't think about what messages they need to hear. And like you said, frequency. What is the method, right? Is it a town hall meeting? Is it a Teams meeting? Is it emails? Is it phone calls? Is it a face-to-face? I mean, it's lots of different ways to communicate. You got to think about that stuff.
You really do. And just my general recommendation, and of course, because I like people too, is communicate early and communicate often.
Yeah.
And, don't ever, and use a variety of different methods.
I was just going to add that when I was saying communicate differently too, right? Early, often, and in unique ways so that you don't bore them, you don't wear them out.
Well, and not just that, it's some people feel more comfortable in, like, for instance, some people love a town hall when they can hear the vision and they can ask questions, and that kind of helps them build. Other people won't reach out, won't ask a question in a town hall.
Right.
No matter what you do. Hey, we're offering $500. That's all right.
Whatever.
I don't need that. But on a one-on-one, coffee cooler kind of conversation or water cooler kind of conversation. I don't think a lot of coolers have coffee in them.
Actually, that's a great idea, though. I mean, we do iced coffee. Why wouldn't we have a coffee cooler? Jen,
exactly.
We're in the wrong industry. I got.
But no, it's, because everybody's comfort level is different.
Yep.
Everybody is different. That's one of the big challenges about people is nobody's the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unique, so
I'm going to slip one in here to your point about different kinds of communication. There's all the direct and explicit communication and those modes we just talked about, right? Email, phone call, meeting, etc. It's like body language, right? Is that indirect communication? I don't know what you call that, but it's the stuff that's implied, that's subtle, that's not obvious. So one I want to throw in there is branding. So you're doing a project, you're making a change. I think there's a lot to be said for branding that activity, branding that project team, the name of the system. Does it have a logo? Should the project team have shirts and feel some community to them? Is there a place for them to come together and work? And when they get a message from them, does it have the same colors? I know I'm talking about some things that engineering and technical folks listening to this might be like, are you kidding me? But I'm going to say it's important because it's a signal. It's a non-verbal, non-direct signal that this is important. We took time on this. We're taking time on this. We want to help everybody understand this change and make this change. And taking a minute to show that it's a team, people are putting in effort. We want it to be polished. That says something about the level of buy-in and the level of importance of the activity. So I think communication can mean a lot of things. And I just wanted to highlight that. It's not just about, having an email or making a phone call.
No, you're right. It's actually, so one of the, very, very early on in my career, one of the things that we were doing was changing, there's a piece of technology it had always been sacrosanct. We were never, it was way too confusing to get in and change it. It was awful. And we decided, but we got to the point we needed to. So as product manager, we had we didn't brand the initiative itself, but we had a motto, and it was actually, and it predated Nike, so I might need to get some royalties, but it was just shut up and do it.
Just shut up and do it. Nice.
Yeah, and we did have T-shirts. We absolutely had T-shirts.
Nice.
And really, because to the point, to your point about the importance and the team effort and that sort of thing, it also can give you kind of a touchstone, of a reminder. All right, this is why we're doing this. This is important. It has value.
It gets back to that alignment piece, right? When people stray, when their priorities, when their day-to-day work gets in the way, it's that touchstone. It's a reminder. Oh, that's why we're doing it. We got to do this, right? This is important.
Right. It's like our core values here at Razorleaf.
Yeah.
Same thing. Kind of guides our activities. Those are important things.
So what else?
So what are... see, I was going to ask you. It's your turn.
Beat you to it.
All right. Part of communication, very closely related. Education.
Yes.
Not just about the tools.
Right. Especially not just about the tools. Right.
Right. And that's because that's one of I think the biggest parts is, and it's an easy thing to focus on when you're in a technology space like we are. It's well, here's the new tools. Here's some training on the new tools. See, these are the buttons you push, and this is how you do that. But I think because we've had this conversation before, you'd like to go a little bit further than that. It's not just how to use the tool.
I would.
What do you want to see?
I would. You hit on exactly what I think is important here, which is when it's time to do some kind of training, educate people, there are several components to this that I think you have to pay attention to, you want to pay attention to. And this reason this is near and dear to my heart is, this was some of my epiphany about OCM years and years ago at Razorleaf is when we would do training, we used to do training that I would say was not great. There were times.
Tool training.
What's that?
It was tool training.
It was tool training, and it was click training. It was
right.
Here's what there's this thing on the toolbar. It's called this. This is what it does. This is what you use it for. Here's the next button. So yeah, I'll try to be brief, but there's a handful of things on this. So one is when it is time for technical training, and you're trying to train somebody how to use this software, this new tool you've implemented, that kind of thing. First off, I think you really shouldn't be training on the tool because the tool is a means to get something done. What you want to train people on is the process. What are they trying to accomplish? What can they expect at the start, or what do they need to assume at the start? You're going to have this, you're going to get this input, you're going to be working on this. What process do they follow? What are the options on that process? Well, if this happens, you do this. If this happens, you do that. Understanding the process and the things you do in the tool to accomplish that process. And then here's how it wraps up, how you hand it off, how you work with somebody else, whatever it might be. But take them through the process. Take them through typical. Take them through some non-typical and what happens if you run into this or that. But process-based training. Train people how to get an outcome, how to do their job, not what are all the buttons and features and menu commands on this piece of software. So I think that's one thing.
I want to ask you a question because I do think that's one of the most important ways to enhance adoption is to show people how to do what they have been doing in this new process or in this new tool. The question is how do you, or when perhaps, do you elicit from them how they're doing their job now?
That's a great question.
Is that part of the planning and alignment stage?
Yeah, it's a lot of times that's part of the project, right? So if you're doing a technology project or you're doing a process project and you're trying to put in a new tool or a new process or some combination, the team that's doing that implementation, right? If you think about not just the OCM part, but the actual put the tool in place, they're likely going to ask that. So you want to leverage what they're already finding out. If they don't, right, as part of the project they're doing, then you probably do need to think about it as part of OCM. So this is a place where the two pieces of the project can work hand in hand. But you do need to know, like, well, what was it like yesterday or what's it like today if you're going to do something different tomorrow? So you can help people understand what the change is, what that gap is, how big a deal it is, that sort of thing. So you need to know how you figure it out. The different projects are going to do it different ways. You might be able to lean on other parts of the team.
Well, and I think that kind of brings up another piece of the training is that what we want to avoid is thinking like, okay, project's done. Now we'll do the training.
Right. Exactly. Right. This will bring me back to that education point, right? So I think there is sometimes in an implementation, there's a logical point when you're getting ready to turn the new system on or make the changes to the system or whatever it is, you're having this milestone moment of cutover that, yes, training will happen right around that, right before it, right after it, something like that. But the process of getting somebody to do something new and to change and to make a change as a group takes a while. You don't do it in, 4 hours of training or 1 week of training or something like that. That process that leads up to it, I would call is more education because it's less about the tool and the clicks and the process and all the detailed steps. And it's more about, well, why? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Why am I doing something differently? And I'll tell you, in a lot of digital product digitalization projects we work on, there's a huge amount of education that needs to take place to level set people, to get us all on the same page talking about terminology and concepts that we don't use. I'll give you a great example. Working with a customer where we were going to implement some PLM and they were going to have some processes for going from a CAD design to an EBOM or engineering bill and moving over to a manufacturing BOM or MBOM. And the first hurdle we had to get over was there were tons of managers, engineering, manufacturing, supply chain. When we said EBOM, MBOM, they looked at us with blank stares. What?
Really?
What do you mean? They're like, yeah, there's an EBOM and an MBOM. Why are you putting those letters in front? Engineering, bill of material, manufacturing, bill of material. Right. We have a bill of material in each of those departments.
We have a bill of material.
Right. And it's like we had to stop and say, look, here's what we're talking about and why. And this is why this software does it this way. And here are the benefits of having them be separate. But here's how you have to synchronize them. Like we had to go through all that education process. And, maybe folks listen to the podcast right now who are like, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, if they could refer to an earlier podcast.
They could.
We do have a whole podcast on that.
But the point is, we all aren't at the same level on this stuff in terms of what do we understand? What do we think is needed? Do we use the same language? And I don't, I say level. That sounds very like elitist stuff. I don't mean that. I just mean we just have different perspectives and understandings. And if we don't take a minute to get on the same page, sometimes that's catching somebody up to, well, here's what I mean when I say this. Other times it's, oh, you call it this, I call it that. Lots of different reasons. But if we don't take a minute to get that alignment, the alignment, right? We're going to have a lack of efficiency in how we work on the next steps, right? You're not going to want to learn how to do the EBOM to MBOM process in training if you have no idea what they are and why they're different and why we would need to have two of them. Right. And so that's where I say, I think it's a continuum of education, training, whatever you call it. But that's the stuff you got to do to really make the change overall. Otherwise, it's just sort of a tactical, hey, use the red pen instead of the blue pen. Why? I don't know, because I told you to.
Right. And nobody likes that. My kids don't like that. Nobody likes that. And I think what you're saying is based on I'm going to say two different types, education and training, because they are different things. They are part of that continuum of communication.
Yes.
Right? Because you're not educating at the end.
That's exactly right.
Or just in the beginning. Like it's a constant, where do we need to go next sort of conversation.
That's right. And you're doing yourself a big favor, by the way, with sprinkling education into your communication, because that's yet another thing that varies it, right? I mean, so there's, all right, I'm telling you, here's what we're doing next month. Here's when the change is coming. Here's when cutover. So there's lots of just informational, like you need to know, here are some updates. But you can sprinkle into your communication. Oh, by the way, did you know we're going to add this to the system when we do this? The reason we're adding that is because blah, 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 blah. And you may have not heard of this, but here's some case studies of other customers that have done it and why it's helped them. All right, that was education, but it may have just come across as a communication, like they're giving me an update on what's going on. But you can sprinkle in and get this stuff delivered in ways that people enjoy and they appreciate. And it's back to that positive sentiment. Like, oh, they taught me something today. Great, I learned something at work. Cool.
Well, so along that continuum, so if we've been doing education, we've been communicating along the way, we've gotten through some level of process and product training, we're done, right? We can just stop.
Of course.
Because everybody knows everything. There's no problems.
Yeah, we're all informed and of one mind and one brain, and the board makes the product. It's great.
There's never any questions after the fact. There's never any problems. There's never so.
Thanks for the setup.
What do we need next?
I think when it's time for the rubber to meet the road, and you've implemented, you've cut over. We're doing the thing. We've had the training. We're ready. You have to think about a support network, right? Mm-hmm. Because we said it already. You don't just change overnight. You don't change over 1 week. It takes time to do it. And there is no amount of training or education that'll ever be perfect, nor will it ever deal with all the situations, nor should it, right? Because that's, it's something we haven't really touched on as we're talking about.
Could you imagine how much training that would be?
Right.
Like in a book form, it'd be like...
It'd be crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. We haven't touched on that as we're talking about these points, but all along the way, not every OCM program has all of these elements, has them, full tilt, full bore. Depending on the size of the project, you have to sort of size your organizational change effort to match. How important is this? How big of a change is it? How long is it going to take? How many people am I impacting? So maybe, anyway, your OCM scales with the size and complexity of the project, number of people, that kind of thing. And this is no different. You're going to have to help people out after you do the cutover. So you need support. But how much support? What kind of support? I think planning, we mentioned planning earlier, but planning your support network is an important thing. Even some processes, potentially, right? So if we take the system view, we're deploying a system, say, we know we're going to have some kind of help desk and get back to people. That one people have probably already thought of, and they may already be planning to use the IT help desk, that kind of thing. But this is more than that. This is when somebody really stubs their toe, when somebody didn't come to training and they're still resistant. How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to get over that? How are we going to help them along? When a new situation comes up that we missed during the project, how are we going to recover? Because it happens, right? And you can't plan everything. So how are you going to catch all from the things that you didn't plan for initially? And how do you escalate it? Do you need extra time? Is a project got to get delayed? Hopefully none of those things happen. But having some what-if plans and having a network in place of the subject matter experts in this area or that area who can support people, who are ready to answer questions because they were given a little bit of time from their full-time job to help support this and make it happen. Those are the kinds of things that really smooth out the after the training piece.
Right. You're not wrong about any of that. I mean, and it's one of the other things I would add is even after you've gotten in your implementation, you got your support network there, you've got your FAQs, you've got places for people to go. There's still a place where I would say you want to come back and continually be measuring things because certain things will jump up that like you didn't plan for, or you've acquired a new company, or you've acquired a new technology, or you're pushing this project into another part of the company, and you want to be continually monitoring that and saying, okay, how are we doing? What can we be doing better? It's one of the core values of a company I used to work for is continual pursuit of excellence, which I love as a core value. And that's what you really want to be. You don't want to. It's very unlikely you're going to hit a certain point, and that's all you're ever going to need to do.
Right.
The technology will change, processes will change. You will need to continue to enhance, and that's one thing you can't do unless you're measuring.
I agree. I'm going to take a contrary view to it while I still agree with you, right? I think you have to measure and monitor because you also need to know at some point the project's done. Not that the system is done and you have to keep improving it. So I agree with you about, you need to continually improve. You need to monitor it, see, is it, how many help desk calls do you have? Are they going through the roof? Are they calming down? Are they steady state? So you have to measure and monitor things. But you can also use that to know, did we succeed? Can we pat ourselves on the back and say, job well done? We implemented,
Right.
we adopted. Yes. And now here's what we need to know about having the steady state hit, or what can you watch to determine we're back to having a problem, we need to do another project, that kind of thing. But I agree with you. I think to help adopt the change and even to know what you need to do next, you have to measure something. You have to measure and
Right.
monitor.
And I think that the type of postmortem that you're talking about there, as far as on the project, can also instruct you and educate you on the next project that
Right.
you do. What did we do well here? What could we have done better? And what do we need to think about next time? Which again, just continually enhances the culture of creating a learning culture, creating an innovative culture. So I think those are both very important. It's one of the things that it's kind of, when you were talking about scalability of your OCM effort, it took me back to one of the, maybe even the first podcast that we did when we were talking about PLM and what is PLM.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the fact that PLM is managing the data around your entire product lifecycle. It's not the same as a PLM system.
Right.
PLM system does PLM, but you don't have to have a PLM system
To do
have
PLM. Yeah.
You don't have to have an OCM project or discipline to be doing OCM.
Absolutely. And I think I hope that, we've likely come to the end of at least the things we wanted to talk about and intro on OCM today. But I think that's the takeaway I hope people have after listening to the episode is OCM is a formal approach to helping organizations change and adopt change, processes, technology, and things like that. But look at it from another angle. It's just a collection of activities and techniques you can use to help with that. It doesn't have to be its own project. It doesn't have to be formal. It's just a lot of good best practices people have learned and used over the years to help organizations change. So think through them. Think through what's right for your project, what you need to apply, what your situation is. And that's what OCM should be, a framework for thinking, how do you help get the result you want?
Right. I agree. And you're right. As far as time goes, we are about ready to wrap up. That was an excellent summary. But you did introduce it. You want to do the closing as well?
Absolutely. Let's do
All
it.
right, go for it.
I'm ready. So today we have talked about organizational change management. We've tried to just introduce the topic. What is it? At least from our perspective, what do we think it is? How does it fit into technology and process projects? Some of the key points you want to think about and have in mind. Why it's important. I think we tried to touch on that early in the episode, and we had another episode that really kind of got us into this. But that's how I would summarize it. Is I think we've got some things that we hope you'll think about when you think about technology and process projects and how you help an organization adopt whatever it is that you're changing by doing that work. And we hope that you'll sort of come back to us, stay in the conversation, give us feedback, offer us comments, come back with questions. What did we mean by this? Why are we saying that sort of thing? Because we love to have you, the audience, in the conversation. It also helps us with what's that next episode? What are we talking about next? Where do we take this from here? So with that, thanks, Jen, for being here and talking about this. I think you and I are both pretty passionate about this one.
Absolutely.
And with that, thanks, everyone, and stay sharp.
Thank you for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions about organizational change management, or you'd like to submit some questions to help shape our next conversation around OCM, which there will be more, please leave us a comment or send us a question in an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We appreciate all the feedback we receive. Make sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on our YouTube channel. Until next time, stay sharp.